Welcome to our weekly compilation. We've got a lot in store for you today, so stick around. Without further ado, let's get started. Night shift gas station clerks. What's the weirdest thing you've ever encountered? Story 1. Not an employee, but I live in an area of Tulsa people describe as a bit smeggy, I guess. One time, I was about to walk into the corner store and I was texting. And as I was texting, my phone expired in my hands. I looked up and through the door to see one man pacing the aisles and another holding a pew-pew pointed at the clerk. I turned and got back in my car and I went to call the police. Phone's expired, remember? So I pulled into my complex and knocked on the maintenance guy's door to call the cops, and he wasn't home. I knocked on the door of a neighbor I knew, and they weren't home either. I went upstairs and charged my phone, and by the time it finally turned on, the police were at the convenience store. Nobody was shot, thankfully, but I remember the helplessness of coming off me in waves. The clerk's name was Sanjay, and I had talked to him numerous times. My most vivid memory of him is the day after his daughter was born. He showed me a photo to every customer who came to the counter. I left in fear, and the whole time I waited, I was terrified he would have been unalived and that I would have been the last person to see him alive. I used to live in places like LA and bigger cities, and at night it can be pretty scary to be in anywhere, let alone a convenience store. I have never had to work at one of those, and part of me is kind of thankful I've never had to be in that situation. Story 2. Nothing really weird happened per se. I worked at a Florida gas station for 3 years while in college. I saw a little kitten one night near midnight wander through the gas pumps, crying out. Cars were driving around the lot, and it could have gotten squashed at any moment. I ran outside, leaving customers at the counter, and scooped him up. He was filthy. Brought him around back, and since I had no cage and nothing to put him in, I placed him inside a Lay's plastic tote, closed the top, and put a brick on top so he'd stay in it. Took him home after my shift, put him on the patio. Surprised my family the next day with a surprise kitten, but to my horror, his colon was prolapsing out of his body in a bloody infected mess. Took him to the vet, who said he probably got attacked by some animal. They gave him a bath, gave him shots, and put him on an antibiotic. When old enough, I got him neutered. The antibiotic fixed the prolapsing colon within a week, and he's still alive today. About 10 years old and more of an inside kitty now than an outside kitty. His name is Kitty, too. That makes sense. I've always thought that whatever names we give to the cats are more for us as well as them. I mean, it's not like they come when you call them, so you might as well call them just kitty or cat, right? Story 3. Not me, but my dad. It was near Christmas time. He was a student working part-time at a gas station that's within city limits, but not really central. So you get all kinds of people. A man stormed inside, looking around wildly before asking my dad, "Do you have rakfisk sauce?" Rakfisk is a traditional Norwegian dish that isn't really eaten that often. My father, kind of confused, told him that no, they did not have rakfisk sauce. The man's eyes darted around the store some more before settling on a small, really smeggy plastic Christmas tree with tiny lights that was placed on the counter. He then said, "I'll take the tree." Put more money than the tree was worth on the counter, took the tree and disappeared into the night. Him and the tree was never seen again. I've been through a lot of things, but I have never been in a situation where I've needed a sauce for fish and came away with shrubbery. I don't know about Raskfisk. Was it, is pine trees a main ingredient of it? Was he planning to make his own? I don't know. Did he realize it was plastic? If it was, there's just too many questions. Too many questions. Story 4. I worked at a gas station and fried chicken joint. Yeah, you know it was in the South when I was in high school. One evening, this older guy came in reeking of alcohol, wearing a bowler hat, a ratty old Hawaiian shirt, boxers, and slides. No pants. He walked into the store, looked at me and my coworker, and his eyes went real wide like dinner plates. Then he promptly turned around and left the store. I thought this was odd, but went about my cleaning until I rounded the corner to where he was, and lo and behold, on the floor was a solitary turd that was previously obscured by the counter. The man had walked into our gas station and dumped on the floor and immediately turned tail and left without so much as a word. Really makes me wonder what kind of life this fellow was living. Needless to say, I refused to clean it up as $7.50 an hour isn't enough to pay me to clean up human excrement. Thankfully, the shift lead cleaned it. I guess she valued her job more than I did. We printed out the guy's face from the security cameras and made sure he was put on our poop list. Story 5. I worked in a rural gas station/garage when I was in high school. One evening I was working, and there were some pretty bad storms brewing. It didn't take long for there to be a fairly large group of people stopped at the station to find some shelter. I didn't think much of it. It wasn't the first time it happened. But then they started blowing the tornado sirens. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of adults and families looking at little 16-year-old me for answers. There's no basement, so I did the first thing I could think of and shoved them all in the walk-in cooler, shut us all in, and rode out the storm. When it passed, I went out, and there was a big plate glass window busted and some stuff blown around the store. All the people came out of the cooler and were pretty much like, "See you later," and left. I was pretty much left there by myself like, what the hell just happened? Story 6. I worked years ago at a gas station alongside my mom. I worked the morning shift. We started at 3:30 a.m. The store is on the Kentucky-Virginia state line, so we've seen a lot of stuff there. A few of the most memorable things that happened was a car pulled up to the diesel pump. Clearly, there was a fight going on. We got close enough to see it was a woman beating a man and looked like she was stabbing him. The woman left, and we locked him in the store until the police and ambulance arrived. She stabbed him with a screwdriver, stole his car and his medication, according to him. Another time, a man had an argument with his wife and casually started stabbing himself in the parking lot. My mom and another coworker were robbed at gunpoint one morning. The dummy came into the store, bought something, and then came back with a mask minutes later. He's in prison now for strong-armed robbery. Sure, you're trying to be economical in your robbery jobs, but if you're going to do your own reconnaissance, that's just a little bit too far. You need someone else to be a lookout. If you can't afford to split up the profits with somebody, then just don't do it in general at all. Just don't. Find some other way. I know times are tough, but please find something else, please. Story 7. There was a blizzard, and they said I absolutely had to come in for the night shift, even in spite of the state of emergency. That was fracked up, and how I managed to get to work was a story in and of itself. Anyway, halfway through the storm, in the middle of the night, a barefoot man with open wounds all over his face came running in. Then he suddenly stopped, stared at me for a moment, and asked if he could have some napkins. I simply pointed at the napkin dispenser. He took a huge fracking handful, then he looked at me and cracked a huge smile and said, "Thank you," in a very childish, pipsqueaky voice. He then disappeared into the night before I could even say anything, and I never saw him again. He was the only customer we had that night, besides a guy from the plow crew who needed some coffee. My guess was Walter White crystals. Story 8. Once had a guy who was very high on speed attempt to sell me a soggy pill. He was literally raining sweat. Another time, I had a very unattractive middle-aged female customer looking like she'd just wrapped up her shift at one of the clubs nearby. She lifted her fupa, grabbed a $5 bill, then handed it to me. I washed it thoroughly afterwards. Oh, this was kind of funny. Kid comes in with his buddies about 2 a.m., and steals my whole rack of vapes off the counter. A few weeks later, I'm just starting my shift, and lo and behold, the kid walks in with his dad. I tell him to get out. Dad asked me, "What did I do?" I replied, "Nah, sir, you're fine. It's just the kid that's gotta go." I have never been so sure that a kid is gonna get a butt whooping as I was then. I've also seen or held my fair share of 9mm, 45s, 22s, and a few really large knives. I was the chill, don't talk to nobody kind of guy. Never got held up, though. Story 9. I don't have many good tales as my store was in a pretty quiet spot. I'm just excited to see an ask that I qualify for. The most memorable thing, I guess, was an old lady who threatened to pee in the parking lot when I told her we don't have a bathroom. Our toilet was busted, so we had a porta potty for employees only. Another guy got mad I wouldn't sell him alcohol without his ID. Local police have been doing stings in my area for the past year, and I can't afford to lose my job, so I card everyone I don't know. I called the non-emergency sheriff because he wouldn't leave, and I was starting to worry. The officer told me and the guy that it was my choice. He then argued that I could sell to him because it was my choice. And I'm like, correct, but I made my decision very clear. No ID, no sale. He was really angry but left after 10 minutes. What officer of the law is going to say, "Oh, it's your choice"? Was this guy trying to catch a nap or something? Was the officer trying to and just didn't want to deal with it? I mean, it's just another reason why a lot of people aren't going to trust cops these days. There's just no reason why he would do that and then probably get busted later on. Who knows? Maybe this guy was an undercover agent trying to buy. We don't know. What's your favorite no fracking way story? Story 1. I went out cruising with a friend of mine and his friends. It was late, probably around 1 a.m. or so, and we were cruising down Main Street. Up ahead, the traffic came to almost a crawl. This is weird since it's late at night. We could see up ahead that there were 3 Ford Focuses all lined up and purposefully slowing traffic. My friend's older brother, who was driving, hops in the median and guns it up to the Focus. We see that it's just a bunch of kids getting their rocks off doing butthole-ish things. The driver says, "Oh, frack no." He turns to my friend and says, "You know what to do." He speeds ahead to the 3 Focuses and pulls up on the side of the street. My friend grabs a cordless drill from the back of the Suburban, the vehicle we're in, jumps out of the vehicle, and takes off the license plate. The Focuses were past us at this point, still going slow to tick off the people behind them. My friend gets back to the suburbs, and we take off. The driver speeds up to the Focus, gets in the median next to the far left Focus, flips them off, then crashes his Suburban into the Focus, which in turn crashes into the other Focuses. At this point, I'm like, what the frack just happened? We watch for a minute as we watch these kids trying to get over their airbags and start assessing the damage. Everyone in the vehicle is busting up laughing, and we take off flying down Main Street. When we got back to my friend's house, he put the license plate back on and popped a dent out of the Suburban. Too long didn't read. A friend's brother purposely crashed into 3 cars because the people were driving like jerkwads. We got away with it. Oh, I don't know. In the D&D alignment chart, that would be known as chaotic good. Definitely. And they got away with it. Story 2. I'm positive this will get buried, but I like telling this anyway. While visiting family in Michigan for our family reunion a few years ago, I live in California, there was a KKK rally in the small town that we were staying in. Being a young black teenager, semi-flipping stuff because there's an actual white supremacist rally going on, I decided to hole up in the grocery store where, coincidentally, 6 other black people, most likely every color in the town, were camping out as well. I made eye contact with a guy that looked nearly exactly like me, just slightly older. He claimed to be driving through the town because he's on a road trip with his friends from Hialeah, Florida. I told him I was born there and then adopted and moved to California. He was immediately curious about the implications of how this happened, and I told him my biological mother's name and that she was too young to take care of me, so she had me adopted. After he hears this, he pulls out a picture of his mother at her high school prom. I reach for my wallet, numb with incredulity as my fingers pull free the same exact picture of this young woman. We have the same mom. We're long-lost brothers. Too long didn't read. I was stuck in a convenience store during a KKK rally in a random town and found my long-lost brother of 16 years. Oh, that is just such a hard story to react to. Great that they found their mother and that they were together, but God, do we have to make the KKK rally the impetus for this happening? I really don't want that to be the reason. I don't. Story 3. This happened back in my undergrad days on the day of an econ midterm. Because the lecture hall is so large and the class has about 300 students, the professor needs a microphone in order to speak to the class. So he's in front of the class giving his whole speech about the exam. 50 questions, multiple choice, make sure to write your name on the Scantron, turn it in up here when you're done, etc. Finally, he bids us all good luck and leaves the lecture hall into his office, which is in the adjacent room. Well, he didn't realize that he left his microphone on. So while the entire class was completely silent during this exam, we all listened to the events that unfolded inside his office. We hear the brief, muffled conversation he is having with a female TA of our class. Then the conversation stops, and it becomes painfully evident that they are having paid spicy time. The quieted moans of the TA are magnified on the speakers in the lecture hall. The entire class remains completely silent, no one wanting to be the first to make some kind of move. Finally, the professor yells loudly, "Oh, frack," and the microphone abruptly shuts off. 20 minutes later, the prof walks out into the lecture hall as if nothing happened. He was fired a week later. Too long didn't read. Professor leaves microphone on during exam, and class listens to him smash his TA in his office. This is straight out of the Naked Gun movies. There was already this kind of thing happening in the first movie, except Frank Drebin left his microphone on while he went to use the restroom. That's still less embarrassing than this story right here. Story 4. My oldest and dearest friend and I met when we were infants. We literally shared a crib together. Our parents have told us hundreds of stories about the things we used to do when we were kids, and we talked to each other about 3 times a month. I don't ever remember not knowing her. She's 23 now, and I'm not too far behind her. She went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I went to Michigan State University in East Lansing. About 3 years ago, I randomly went to Ann Arbor with some friends and was trying to find her to catch up and see her new place. As I was walking and talking to her on the phone, she mentions she lives on Ann Street. I joke with her and say, I live on Ann Street. What a coincidence. We should have breakfast in the morning since we live down the street. Her. Funny, jerkwad. Just get here. The address is 517. Me. Wait, your address is 517 Ann Street? Her. Yes. Me. My address is 517 Ann Street. I got to her place and realized that not only do we have the exact same address in different cities, but our crossroads are the same too. She lives on the corner of Ann and Division. I live on the corner of Ann and Division. Too long didn't read. I've known my bestie for my entire life, and we're both living at the same address in different cities at the same time. What kind of strange, spot-on numerology is that? Story 5. I worked at a small restaurant on the north shore of Lake Superior the summer of my junior year of college. The woman who owned it was an ultra-conservative fundamentalist Christian. They sold plots of land to people for Y2K. After a full summer full of craziness, I had enough and wanted to go on a trip. My brother and I and a friend decided to go see the Grand Canyon, so I told the owner that I had to work on a paper for Bible school and would like to leave a couple weeks early. She was reluctant, but in the end sent me off with her blessing because I was doing the Lord's work. So we head out on a road trip to the Grand Canyon, never bothering to look on a map as to where it actually was. We ended up somewhere out west at a place called the Grand Canyon that looked totally unimpressive, so we headed up to Glacier National Park as an alternative. We pulled into a gas station near Glacier, and who the hell do I see but the owner that I'd lied to and her entire family that I'd gotten to know throughout the summer. I ducked down in the car while my brother walked by them and looked at me with this "what the hell" expression on his face. We tore out of there and I never saw them again. What are the odds? Story 6. A few years ago, I made plans to go see 9 Inch Nails in Massachusetts on their final tour with a friend of mine, along with his 2 friends. We're from New York. On the trip, the MIA song Paper Planes comes on, and the 3 of us start singing along, making all the noises obnoxiously, which annoys the 4th guy, Shane. He tells us that he hates the song, which ended up being a bad idea because my friend found and purchased the single for that song, complete with 5 remixes later that day. We headed into town a couple days early, so there was plenty of annoying Shane with the song, along with making jokes about how maybe if we ask nicely, Trent Reznor will play it at the concert. The day of the concert comes, and as the opening act, Street Sweeper Social Club plays their set, the singer announces, "The next song isn't on our album," and launches into a cover of, you guessed it, Paper Planes. It took a few moments to sink in because I really couldn't believe that it was actually happening. It was too perfect. Here, we had been annoying him obnoxiously for the entire trip with this song, which the rest of us genuinely liked for the record, only to have the opening act of the concert play it out of nowhere. It would have been more hilarious if 9 Inch Nails somehow did a cover of that, but that's just as good. I think it actually kind of works better because you're not expecting the opening act to do anything like that. But that's just too cool. I wonder if Shane ever hung out with these guys again after this whole thing, after they got back from the concert. Maybe he stayed away for a few days. I can probably guarantee that. I accidentally ruined a pregnancy announcement for complete strangers, then months later was told I was responsible for the best story of their life. What are your most awkward stories that turned out to be awesome? Story 1. Second weekend at a giant college in the city as a freshman was incredibly daunting. It was really hard to find friends, and even if you did click with someone in one of these stupid orientation events, our school is so huge that unless you go all-out socially successful penguin and ask them to go to a movie or something with you 15 minutes after meeting them, you'll probably never see them again. So I'm thankfully in a class with a girl that I get along with well enough. And late in the week, she asks if I want to come to a party at a bar that had rented out with that weekend. Thankfully, to finally have been asked to do something with the prospect of making a real friend, I'm super excited about it. Sounds so lame now, but this college really is completely huge, and I was so overwhelmed. Fast forward to Friday. I met her at this bar. We had a great night, made some real friends headway. Suddenly, it's 3 a.m., and we decide to go home. My dorm is across the city via a really sketchy walk, and being the terrified freshmen that we were, neither of us thought making that walk alone was a good idea. New friend offers to let me stay in her dorm. Her suite mate is out for the weekend, so I have a bed to sleep in. We get back to her dorm, drunk and tired, and lo and behold, her crazy suite mate has not only locked the door to her room, but zip-tied the doorknob. It's a college dorm, so no couch. New friend awkwardly asks if I want to sleep in her tiny college twin bed with her. Keep in mind, we've had at most 4 conversations prior to this night. And I can tell she's hesitant to ask, but also doesn't want to kick me out. I'm unfamiliar with the subway and don't want to walk back alone, so I agree, and we spend the entire night, spooning in a tiny twin bed. Wake up the next morning to her roommate, who had barely conversed with her at this point, giving us extremely quizzical glances. 4 years later, and about to graduate, we're still living together, and she's become my best friend from college. I guess it's good, or else it would have made for a few weird exchanges in the hallway. And the roommate has also become a great friend. What was the roommate? Well, I guess the roommate was afraid of probably this situation. Maybe someone was going to come in and puke in their bed or something like that because they were so drunk. That I can kind of understand, but if they made friends, I guess it all worked out and they were able to talk it out. I would hope so. Story 2. One time my friend's grandma passed away. So we all wore black and tried to look super fancy because we were preteens. I don't know. After the funeral, we went out to dinner at one of those chain restaurants because nothing pairs with crying quite like wordplay-themed appetizers. So we're sitting there and our server comes up and he's bursting with flair and bouncing everywhere and so ready to tell us about the specials that he's going to explode with compliments. So he does. So, girls, you look super nice. Must be headed to a fun time. You're all dressed up. Got a big date? Big dance? Love it. Love dancing. You all look souped up for a big night. Where's your date? Going solo? Cute. So cute. Tell me about your big plans. He's foaming with excitement. Here are a bunch of awkwardly dressed up preteens, and he's like 20-something, and I bet he thinks we think he's so cute and charming, and my mom is probably going to give him a monster tip. But I'm 13, and I bloody hate everybody, so of course I have to be the one that looks at him straight in the eyes in the most deadpan voice I've got and say, "No, we just came from a funeral. Her grandma passed away." His face dropped so quickly that it was actually painful to watch. It was the most awkward moment I've ever created to date, and I'm an awkward situation maestro. Never before had I witnessed someone actually stumble over their words out of sheer embarrassment. He was so flustered he couldn't get out more than a couple grumbles that sounded a little bit like, "I'm sorry," but more like, and then he just turned around and fled. Afterwards, we giggled like the horrible little creatures that are 13-year-old girls, but it was thigh-smashingly awkward for that guy. Poor waiter. Also, our food was free, so that was awesome. Hell yeah, potato skins. Oh, well, they sound like a bunch of mean girls, like they're just really coming into their sociopathic teenage years. I think this was like the official threshold that they crossed into teenagerhood. I mean, just kind of laughing at this person's misfortune. I don't know, maybe it was the levity. The person's grandma did pass away. You got to deal with it somehow. Story 3. I was invited to a graduation party for this girl who was in my class in high school, and there were tons of people there. Her parents were really chill and always seemed to like me. It probably helped that I dated her sister a year or two back, and because I spent a bunch of time at their house during the summer. Anyways, back on track. Everyone was swimming, playing volleyball, generally chatting it up, and toking in the pool house. When me, under the influence of teenaged hunger, went inside, I saw a whole ton of food that people were munching on. Appetizers, soda, chips, pretty much everything. I took a slice while everyone was outside. Hey, why not? And it was amazing. I promptly loaded my plate and went outside to tell everyone that pizza was ready. I opened the door and yelled for everyone to listen to me. I told them I just had a pizza. No ordinary pizza, but a pizza filled with fracking anchovies. Lo and behold, her mom walks into me and tells me that they were saving the pizza for after the appetizers. I immediately told her to excuse me as this made me feel uneasy. I went to the bathroom, and lo and behold, my stomach does not agree with anchovies. I started throwing up again and again, and used just about the whole toilet roll to clean up after myself. When I went to flush, the toilet got clogged, so I opened up the back of the toilet, and what's inside? A fracking brick of weed. Too long didn't read? No ordinary sandwich. Well, I think if this is going to be a story turned awesome, he had to have gotten this brick out without anybody noticing. I don't know. Either that or how did it end, really? How did it end up so often? I want to know. What do you think happened? Story 4. When I was in college, we used to play a drinking game called the Buffalo Club. You weren't allowed to ever drink with your glass, bottle, pitcher in your right hand. If you were drinking with your right hand and were caught, any of the other members of the Buffalo Club would shout, "Buffalo!" at you, and you had to chug the remainder of whatever you were drinking on the spot. The way you recruited new members was to just randomly ask the person if you could borrow a nickel. Since most people, even broke college students, will readily loan you 5 cents, they usually hand it over. Then, you inform them that, like it or not, they just paid their dues and are now a member of the Buffalo Club. The year after I left school, I returned to a party with some friends that were a year younger than me. There was a new girl there sitting around the table, and she kept drinking with her right hand. I knew my friends and was absolutely sure that she had to be in the club if she was one of their drinking buddies now. I waited until the next time she took a drink and pointed at her and shouted, "Buffalo!" My friend sitting next to me immediately leaned over and whispered pointedly, "She doesn't have a left hand." After that, I noticed that she always kept her left hand, or should I say her left wrist stump, tucked in her pocket or under her shirt. I was horrified, but she either didn't hear me, didn't understand, or played it off like it was no big deal. Story 5. I was working out of town for the summer when my sister flew into a nearby city for her cousin-in-law's wedding. Since the only time I had to visit with her was right after work on the night of the event, she and I agreed to meet out in the parking lot, hang out for a little bit, and then go on our ways. Once I arrived, she insisted that I come inside and sit down at a table and get something to drink. I blanched at the idea, considering I was in my paint and sawdust-covered stage carpentry clothes. She insisted it would be fine and pointed out a few of the most casually attired wedding guests to put me at ease. Not 5 feet into the reception hall are we when I hear this squeal of delight. "Wedding crasher!" cheered the bride. She bounced up to us. "OMG, I have a real wedding crasher!" It was then that I remembered the Wedding Crashers movie had been released a few short months before. Obviously, she knew I was my sister's twin, what with the resemblance and all, and she was fine with my coming in. The fact I crashed her wedding was just the icing on the cake. So now there are photos in the official wedding album of me and the bride, me and the new couple, my sister and I with the bride, and so on. Every time they see us, I'm joyfully greeted. It's an honor to be their official wedding crasher. But I'm still mortified that I let my sister talk me into walking into their wedding wearing a "Say No to Illicit Substances" t-shirt and cut-off jeans. Nurses. Despite being ranked the most trusted profession for 15 years in a row, what are the dirty secrets you'll never tell your patients? Story 1. I work at a New York City ER. I'm not joking at all when I say the nurse-to-patient ratios are usually 1 to 18, up to 1 to 30 on very bad nights. I am literally the only person to take care of all of these people, their extensive families and field complaints and true medical emergencies, especially because my techs are off in the back texting or hiding away or get pulled to do constant observations of high-risk patients. I have varying degrees of sick patients, but I find the ones that are most stable are the biggest complainers who threaten to leave the hospital. I tell them they're free to leave at any time. Also, I've had people who complain of 10 out of 10 pain, walking around and talking on their phone and laughing. They follow me around. Pain medications cannot be given earlier just because you follow me around. I once had a sickle cell patient tell me that the patient I'm working on at the moment is already passed away, so I better give her pain medications. I told her she better leave. The curtains between beds, I don't even know the definition of the words private room when it comes to a hospital, are not good for privacy. Isolation patients are sometimes right next to another patient because we're so full. If I'm running around, a person needing a bedpan or water is the least of my concerns. I work trauma bay very frequently, and family members get in the way, to a point where they impede their loved one's care. There's probably tons more that I can't remember right now. I think everyone wants to see someone that they love not be in pain. I can understand that some people complain, and there are some, rightly so, that they need some care, but they're not getting it. And I don't think that's completely the nurse's fault, especially with nurse-to-patient ratios like that. Story 2. Sister is a nurse who has had surgery for a torn rotator cuff 3 times, fusion on her cervical vertebrae, and more sprains and pulls on her lower back than I can count. She is in freakishly good shape, but lifting, turning, and assisting obese patients is crippling her. Fat is shifty and unpredictable when a patient is in pain and/or under the influence of pain meds. I was visiting when an obese friend was recovering from gallbladder surgery and watched as he swung one tree trunk-sized leg over the side of the bed to stand up, and the rest of his bulk followed like a mudslide. Sis ran over and caught him and rolled the whole sleepy beast back onto the bed. A bad fall could have really set back his recovery. I heard a bone-crunching sound as her back bent under the weight. Her big secret is that she has been ordered to get the lift, an awkward and bulky sling/crane, for any patient over a certain BMI to avoid further injuries. Most of her patients complain that she's deliberately humiliating them by hauling out the crane each time they must be walked or the linens changed. But there is no safe way for most healthcare workers to habitually muscle around obese patients. Too long didn't read? The sling isn't there to shame obese patients. It's there to help healthcare workers avoid crippling injuries to staff and patients. If you're in pain, you are in pain. Focusing on yourself and your pain, yes, I can understand that. But this is not something where you're complaining about a retail store worker who's probably just standing there in some capacity. There's someone who is assisting you and who's physically getting you around. I can see both sides of this one too, but yeah, I think it's great that there is a device helping more obese patients actually get around for the safety of everybody. Story 3. My mother has been a nurse for 25 years and has always worked hard. It breaks my heart that she often doesn't take a break even to eat during her 12-hour shifts because she doesn't have time. Her hospital is understaffed and overstressed, and she's the floor manager. I'm not sure if that is the correct title, and must help out the new nurses in addition to doing all her own work. She must also find a replacement if a nurse calls in sick. She does not get paid a higher salary for doing this extra work. It doesn't help that she struggles to keep up with her new charting systems. I know she's not technologically savvy, and I worry for her. She often came home an hour after her shift ended because she had to finish stuff up. She does it off the clock, but has been written up for being too slow with it. She is so exhausted mentally and physically all the time. I just wish as she grows older she could have a cushier job experience. The stories of incompetence, indifference, and neglect of both patients and the nursing staff that I hear just make me sad. And most are caused by administration decisions and budget cuts. The nurses are the ones who get botched over the most. Be kind to them. With all the talks of strikes going on, I'm trying to think in my mind if there's any healthcare strike going on or in the future. I think there have been a few nurse strikes going on, and it's stuff like this that just brings about quite a lot of support for nurses if they do. Story 4. For the last few years, it's more important to make patients happy instead of using our skills and knowledge to help make you feel better. This is dangerous. Our job is to heal, H-E-A-L, not to heal, H-E-E-L. We have way more patients than just you. That means while you're pushing your call button for the 100th time wanting something menial, we have other patients actively passing away. We hate that we can't answer in a timely fashion, but we have to prioritize. I'll run to the patient that is coding before I'll take you your 10th pack of graham crackers. Also, we aren't being mean when we make you take part in your own healthcare. If you're an illicit pharmaceutical seeker, we fill your IV with saline when you think it's morphine, just to watch you be stupid and act like you're high when you really aren't. We're tired. We're overworked. We have constant changes and new rules. We're overwhelmed. Just be patient and be understanding. There's a whole lot more going on than you can ever see. Also, end-of-life care. If you're actively passing away, usually there's an order for morphine and Ativan that we use to calm your respirations and ease your pain. Almost every nurse I know has given it as often as possible to help you ease into passing. This isn't especially a bad thing. Story 5. In many areas of the U.S., thanks to brutal cost-cutting measures, chances are your nurses on some level are worried about hurting or having a patient injured/neglected, etc., for simple lack of time. They have to check orders, safely give medications, provide other treatments like wound care, admit and discharge patients, make sure tests and other exams get done, bathe, feed, ambulate patients, monitor and assess your condition, and communicate with you, your family, your doctors, your CNAs, and all the other tasks to get done. Then do endless charting on each and everything for between 4 to 7, or hell, more if someone called off or your facility sucks, patients on a med/surge floor. Lots of times they barely have a chance to pee, grab a snack, much less a meal, or an actual break. This is over a 12-plus hour shift. Even with the CNAs and other ancillary staff, there's just not enough time in the day. The CNAs are just as understaffed as the RNs, but they risk getting written up because a patient whined that it took 15 minutes to get fresh ice water. Story 6. If you and your family are nice to me, I will go above and beyond to make sure that you're comfortable, and I will do whatever extra I can to help you. However, if you're rude to me or your family becomes verbally abusive or aggressive, I will keep you alive, and I won't do anything nice or extra for you. I'm not neglectful, but I certainly won't want to go in your room any more than necessary. Also, sometimes I would love to just be honest with some family members who are aggressive and just be like, listen, we're on the same team here. You want them to get better. I want them to get better too. I spent lots of money in 4 years of my life to even get licensed to do this. I want to take care of your loved ones and make sure they go home with the best quality of life. Please, stop fighting me and the rest of the medical team like we're on opposite sides of this issue. We all want the same thing, damn it. I think, again, this goes to the comparison of equating nurses with retail store workers or fast food employees or some other customer-facing job. Their skill set and what they're dealing with is going to be a little bit different, and trying to bully them is not going to result in better service. I don't think these people getting bullied are going to result in better service no matter what kind of customer-facing job you're working.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
What's the weirdest thing a medical professional has casually said to you? Story 1. If you want to help people, don't go into medicine. As a doctor, I'm nothing more than a people mechanic, and much like a car mechanic, I patch people back together well enough to get them out the door until I see them again. If I could go back, I'd run as far away from medicine as I could. Edit. Well, this gained more traction than I expected. For context, this sentiment was offered to me by a 70-year-old, 40-plus year tenured physician who was on more boards than I care to list and was a very well-respected surgeon. As many in the comments have stated, his distaste for the job had very much to do with the long list of hoops that he had to jump through in order to perform even the most basic treatments. And yes, the endless charting was exhaustive to witness, much less perform. He also went so far as to send a hospital-wide email asking any physician who had the time to sit in a meeting with all of the pre-med people who had dedicated the most time to shadowing for a brief back and forth. Asked a few questions along the lines of, who's unhappy with their job? How many have been divorced? How many think you're overworked? How many would go back to med school, especially with a debt load today? And a few more questions that painted a very, at least with this group of 40-plus people, realistic picture of how unhappy they all were. At least 80% raised their hands in favor of the most negative option presented, and briefly attested to how bad and how hard the job had been. And of those that were heavily in favor of the job, I'd say at least 80% were quite obviously there for the money and nothing more. I still have an immense respect for those who choose to work in healthcare, but I'm also glad I steered away from it, especially when I consider that I would have entered residency in the midst of a pandemic. Ew. You know what I think? If a doctor said this to me, I would respect and trust them more. A German friend of mine was a car mechanic to surgeon pipeline. And he said he got tired of working on cars, so wanted to work on people. He'd taken the required test to qualify for med school and kept it in his back pocket in case he got tired of being a mechanic. So it worked out for him. Really cool guy, super unique. Comes off like a loud metalhead. One of the smartest and nicest guys I know. Isn't it true that most jobs, or at least when you're starting out on these jobs, have some aspect of it that you don't want to do, like paperwork or something? I think there's more and more of this probably in healthcare, especially with how much money there is to be made of it and how people need to keep track of this stuff in order to make that money. And I think that is what puts pressure on the people who actually want to be doctors and actually want to help people instead of having to fill out forms and charts. Story 2. Was living in a foreign country and had a cold or flu type illness. Went to the doc and he came in eating a bowl of cereal. Already weird. Checks some things and says, "Do you know what AIDS is?" I'm in complete shock and say, "Yes, I do." He follows up with, "It's a virus, and there's no cure." Goes on to explain why there's no cure, all the while I'm seeing my life over as I know it. Finally ends with, "But you don't have that virus. You have a different one, much more common and treatable. But I wanted you to understand why an antibiotic wouldn't work." Still in shock, I'm like, "So I don't have AIDS then, right?" He goes, "No," and walks out. What a roller coaster. Edit. This was in Switzerland about 15 years ago, and I'm American. Yes, he was slurping his cereal the whole time. Edit 2. He did explain the difference between HIV and AIDS. Guess he just wanted to come in hot and get my attention. Thanks all. Yeah, I went to a intimate health checkup, and the doc just started listing each possible STI before finishing with, "You don't have those." For some reason, they love to act like it's a game show. "Herpes, we tested you for herpes. Did we see herpes?" No herpes, but what about gonorrhea? Do we see gonorrhea? Could you imagine if there was like a board like that, like Family Feud up on there, and the doctor is giving you all of that and he has it set up on a remote control, not even like a computer screen that's set up to look like it, but like an actual physical board, complete with a buzzer and everything. I actually wouldn't mind that. It would kind of make the doctor's visit a little more exciting, to be honest. That's depending on the outcome, of course. Story 3. Not me, but Mom. She's in remission for a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that invaded her brain. Ooh. She was getting a scan to confirm the cancer had left her brain pan, and the doctor came in and said, "Good news! We scanned your brain and confirmed that there's nothing in there. I know he was joking, but there was at least one instance where a patient walked into a clinic to get a brain scan to figure out why he had headaches, only for all the doctors to be absolutely shocked when it looked like he had no brain, just an empty skull. Turns out the guy had a condition where fluid would leak and build up in his skull. He used to have this fluid regularly drained, but he either stopped going or his doctors falsely assumed he was cured. I don't remember. As the fluid slowly built up over the years, it just kind of slowly pushed his brain until it was lining the inside of his skull. The brain is squishy enough and the fluid buildup was just slow enough that it didn't affect his physical or mental capabilities at all until there was no room left for his brain to go. The headaches were from his brain slowly being crushed against his skull. No idea how the guy is doing now or how they treated that issue. My assumption would be that you can't just drain all the fluid at once without causing brain damage, but I'm not a doctor. I was once in an accident where I fell and had to be x-rayed to see if there was any damage to my head, and I did get that joke of good news, there's nothing in there. Yeah, I was actually kind of expecting it. I think that's probably also news that also led me to believe that I would be all right even before the x-ray came out. Story 4. When my girlfriend was in the ICU, one of the nurses sort of shrugged and said dismissively, "She's gonna pass away anyhow." She should have. Her kidneys had shut completely down, and she was so swollen that her tongue wouldn't fit in her mouth. We were making the decision whether to continue life support or not. She didn't pass away. A month and a half later, she walked out of the hospital and into my car for the ride home. When I was in the hospital with COVID, my nurse told me to either breathe or expire, but I needed to choose because she was busy. When my kidneys were failing, my doctor sat me down and described my treatment plan to me, then looked me in the eye and told me that it was totally all right if I refused treatment, but I would definitely pass away if I did. Had a doc say once, "You don't have to stay for observation. You can leave any time you want, but if you walk out that door, there's nothing I can do to help you." Weird story. I left anyway, but made a follow-up appointment with a cardiologist, and they wouldn't take me without insurance. Every doc since has said my heart is fine, so I have to assume it was the amount of alcohol I was drinking at the time. Story 5. Doc, do you know what AIDS is? Patient, yeah, sweating. Doc, well, you should be happy to know the good news is you don't have that. Patient, that's a good thing, I guess. Doc, the bad news is that you probably have cancer. Doc, on phone, I have some bad news and some worse news for you. Patient, okay, what's the bad news? Doc, I have your test results and the report says you probably have about 7 days or so left to live. Patient, oh my deity, if that's bad news, what the hell is the worst news? Doc, I meant to call you last week. Doc, I have some bad news. You better sit down. Patient, what is it, Doc? Doc, you have very little time left. Patient, oh my deity, how long do I have? Doc, 5. Patient, 5 what? Years? Months? Doc, 4, 3, 2. Story 6. My surgeon, during surgery to replace pins in my broken finger that had been pushed out by my own body. I'm really getting them in there this time, you little freak of nature. I would kind of be flattered by this. Also, did you make a lot of Wolverine jokes, or did the pins get pushed in a direction that wasn't along your fingers? Sadly, they were put in to hold the bone in place so it could heal. The pinholes healed too fast and pushed the pins out of position so they weren't holding the bone where it needed to be. I looked more like a knockoff Edward Scissorhands than Wolverine. My doctor asked me, male, if I had been hit in the taint. I was young and didn't know what a taint was. So he said, you know, it taint vagina and it taint butt. You can't ask a kid if they've been hit in the perineum. Hell, you can't ask an average adult that, but it's still a relevant question. Source, I'm a doctor. I'd rather there would be a comment for an operation like this. I'm really getting him in there this time, to just casually saying, oh, just replace him and sees what happens. It sounds like he's just invested in the patient's health in a unusual sort of way. I'd be into that. If OK Boomer was a digital assistant like OK Google, what sort of answers would it give you to certain questions? Story 1. OK Boomer, directions to 5th and Montgomery? We don't need a map. I know where it is. Waits a minute. I used to be a courier running rural routes. Ended up in this podunk town trying to find a rural route's address. These are post office addresses, not street addresses, and the post office would not tell us where the house was located because we were the competition. I stopped at the only store or gas station in town. Town was this store, a feed and hardware store, and a bar. Everyone stops what they're doing and turns to look at me when I walk in. No smeg. This town is nowhere near a highway. They don't get many out-of-town visitors. I ask where so-and-so at this address lives. The cashier stared at me for the longest time, then tells me to take the road west out of town for so many miles and take a right at the old Johnson barn, then down another mile on the left. I ask what color the barn is. She tells me the barn is gone. I'm supposed to take a right where the old Johnson barn used to be. That was a joke. I've heard a comedian use that joke before as some kind of thing. I know I've heard it. But I think a lot of us would be literally lost without our phones. I probably would. We'd have to go back to paper maps and learning how to read those. Story 2. Oh, my deity, this drives me insane. The most mundane question sets off a 15-minute history of the population of your hometown. Hey, Dad, where did you go this afternoon? Well, you remember John Wright? He's Big Jim's daddy. You know, Big Jim, he used to work at the gas station right by Delmer's. Well, it used to be that Delmer's, now it's a Sears, but Big Jim was Jason's brother. Jason, whose sister's daughter was that boy in your class's mom. The boy who got in trouble when he robbed that feed store. Anyway, John wanted me to look at some land he wanted to buy. It's downright next to Margaret Shore's old house. You know Margaret. He lost me at John Wright, and the guy who robbed the feed store was in my sister's class, who is 10 years my senior. Edit. Look, I understand the sentiment from a lot of replies saying, he just wants to talk to you. He loves you. Have empathy and all. And I agree with that sentiment in general, but please trust that I know my dad, and that is not the place where this rambling is coming from in his case. I could just imagine. Well, I think some people complain that I take a little too long when I make my comments on these videos, so I think some of that might be directed at me. You know, that reminds me of Story 3. Okay, Boomer. Engineering job listings in my area. Job listings? You're just playing around on the internet. Figure out where you want to work and go down there. Ask to speak with a manager. Shake his hand. Look him in the eye and ask for a job. Edit. This post brought to you by painful memories of job hunting during the 2008 recession. My dad was getting on my case every day about playing on the computer when I was checking job sites and going through their infuriating sites that make me upload my resume, then fill in fields that are on my resume 3 different times. Someone in the comments below dropped the classic, "Pound the pavement," and I felt my blood pressure spike. Thanks. Everyone was saying pound the pavement. Then a pandemic hit, and these people were still complaining that you weren't out there finding a job, even though it was kind of preventing you. Oh, that was so frustrating. People just don't know how much of it is online and how much that is the case. Ugh. Story 4. Okay, Boomer, wake me up at 6. Wakes you up at 5. Get up, it's 6. Okay, Boomer, how's the weather today? Open the window and stick your arm out. Is it wet? That must mean it's raining. Is it cold? Put on a sweater. Try figuring things out on your own, kiddo. Okay, Boomer, what's the weather like? Why don't you go out for a walk and see for yourself? Story 5. My dad's problem is more that he's way too fracking slow. I've literally seen an exchange that went something like this when he wanted Alexa to play Man on the Silver Mountain by Rainbow. Dad: Alexa. Alexa starts listening. Dad: massive pause as he realizes he doesn't actually know what he wants to ask her. Alexa: sorry, I didn't catch that. Dad: Alexa. Alexa starts listening. Dad: play me. Alexa: sorry, I didn't catch that. Dad: Alexa, shut the frack up and listen for a second. Alexa: sorry, I don't understand. Dad: Alexa? Alexa starts listening. Dad: play me Man. Alexa starts searching for man. Dad: on the... Alexa: sorry, I couldn't find that in your library. Story 6. I had a phone interview today, and the guy asked me, how can you tell if an email is not legit or contains a virus? And I said, well, for the average user, you can't. Most people would look at an email address and assume that's where it's coming from, because while spoofing emails isn't that common, if someone's spear phishing, they can make it look convincing. And he said, no, I'm asking how you tell if an email isn't legit or has a virus. What steps would you take to determine if an email was safe? And I said, if I had to dig further to find out whether an email is legit, I would have to look at the email header and determine whether the information there matches with the domain DNS. Maybe there's a DKIM key. Maybe the MX record points to one server and the email was received from another. There are many other factors we can use. For example, call the sender on your phone and see if they sent you something, if it doesn't sound like an email they normally send you. And then he said, no, that's not what we're looking for. Why didn't you just do a virus scan on the computer? That tells you right away if there's a virus. I'm at a total loss of words. I forgot that not opening email attachments from suspicious sources isn't the default thing that people do. I remember that growing up. We've all opened that one email attachment early on in our online life, haven't we? We all have. I remember that, and we learned that lesson really quickly. We need to teach it to our adults. Story 7. Okay, Boop, by your age, I had a house, car, and $50K in savings. You need to stop asking for handouts. My dad knocked up my mom right before he deployed for his first year in the military. Thus, they lived on base housing. No rent, utilities, etc. They basically paid for food and stuff to keep us kids entertained. My mom worked, but that's because my dad is very stingy with his money. Her and my dad all the time. Well, when I was your age, I had 2 kids, I lived out on my own, and I was paying for all of my own stuff. No student loan debt, no real bills, no heavy expenses. Of course, when I point this out to them, they tell me that I should have gone into the military. I fracking hate the military. Edit to add, that's a lot of upvotes. And I'm nervous, y'all. Having said this, please be respectful to people who are actively serving or who have retired from serving our country. While they chose a life path I disagree with, they do not deserve hate. We're all just good little beings trying to make it in this crazy world. Have a wonderful day, you beautiful creatures. Story 8. My grandma has full-on conversations with Siri. Hello, Siri. What is the name of the museum in Maryland that's getting written up in the... Siri. Here is a list of museums in Maryland. Grandma. Washington Post. What did she just say? Siri, what did you say? I can't stand this woman. Siri. Siri. Did you want to see articles from the Washington Post? Grandma. No, I would not. I would like to know the name of the museum that was written up there. Siri. 3 dots. Grandma. Oh, for heaven's sake, how do you talk to this batty woman? Story 9. You. Okay, Boomer. It didn't work. Couldn't get buzzed in through the security door. Also, the manager isn't on site and works remote from another city. Also, they don't hire directly, so you have to apply to the staffing agency first. Also, the position advertised through the staffing agency isn't really open because they've already selected someone internally and only posted it to meet regulations. Boomer? You're just making excuses. Again, related to the job search, I am grateful that I have the career that lets me work remotely and I have great people that I work with. but getting there was a nightmare. And there were a lot of issues like this, and not to mention all the scams I had to go through as well. People don't know. They don't.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 10. Okay, Boomer, open YouTube. How? Can you show me? Always quickly followed up with, oh, I know how to use computers. I knew how before anybody else did. I'm not dumb, you know. As accusatory as possible for absolutely no reason when you fix the problem in under 2 minutes.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.